The Nexari Empire had conquered 17 civilizations before reaching Earth. Each victory had followed the same pattern: overwhelming force, surgical precision, and the inevitable surrender of beings who understood the futility of resistance. Admiral Vorkath stood on the bridge of the Dominion-class warship, Eternal Victory, his iridescent scales reflecting the blue marble of Earth below. His mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. "Another primitive world," he announced to his command staff, gesturing at the holographic display showing Earth's military capabilities. Nuclear weapons, primitive spaceflight, and internal combustion engines. Status: Pre-FTL civilization, classification, standard conquest protocol. The bridge crew maintained their professional composure, but Vorkath could sense their relaxed posture. This would be another routine operation, another footnote in the Empire's endless expansion. The scans showed human military bases, weapon stockpiles, and defensive positions, all painfully obvious to their advanced sensors. What the scans didn't show, what they couldn't show, was humanity's capacity for asymmetrical thinking. The first sign that something was wrong came during what should have been a routine neutralization of Earth's nuclear capabilities. The Nexari had performed this operation countless times, simultaneous strikes on all nuclear facilities, followed by an electromagnetic pulse to disable secondary launch systems. It was meant to be over in minutes. Instead, the strike teams found empty silos. Dummy installations. Decoys that had been broadcasting false signals for years, anticipating the possibility of alien invasion. The real nuclear arsenals were hidden in places so obvious, so mundane, that the Nexari's sophisticated algorithms had dismissed them as irrelevant. "Impossible," Vorkath hissed, his scales darkening with anger. "Their technological level indicates no knowledge of extraterrestrial threat. They couldn't have prepared for us." His tactical officer, Renlith, brought up a historical database. "Sir, humans have a concept called science fiction. They've been imagining and preparing for alien invasions for over a century. They've written thousands of scenarios, explored countless strategies, they've been practicing for us in their minds since before they had electricity." Vorkath dismissed this as irrelevant fantasy. The Nexari Empire had never failed a conquest, and they wouldn't start now. He ordered the second phase, the standard display of force over major population centers. Massive ships appeared over Earth's largest cities, a sight that had broken the will of countless civilizations before. The humans looked up at the ships. Then they went underground. Not in panic, not in fear, but with purpose. Within hours, Earth's major cities had seemingly emptied. But they weren't abandoned, they were transforming. Subway systems became command centers. Sewer networks turned into transport routes. Shopping malls transformed into makeshift hospitals and supply depots. "Sir," Renlith reported, "we're detecting unusual patterns of human movement. They appear to be implementing pre-existing protocols." "What kind of protocols?" Vorkath demanded. "They're calling them zombie apocalypse plans, sir. Apparently, humans have been creating and sharing strategies for surviving global catastrophes as a form of entertainment." The Admiral's facial scales flattened in disbelief. "They prepared for planetary invasion by planning for imaginary undead creatures. The principles appear to be surprisingly applicable, sir. Decentralized leadership, supply cache networks, civilian resistance strategies." Before Renlith could finish, the first counterattack began. Not from military forces, but from civilian infrastructure. Water treatment plants released carefully calculated chemicals that created clouds of sensor-blocking vapor. Power plants initiated controlled overloads that generated electromagnetic pulses, disrupting Nexari communications. Traffic control systems orchestrated massive gridlock patterns that made ground troop movement impossible. The Nexari's advanced AI struggled to predict human responses because humans weren't following any rational military doctrine. They were following disaster plans created by countless individuals, refined through years of imagination and collaborative theorizing. Vorkath watched as his perfect invasion plan began to unravel. His species had evolved from ambush predators, and their military doctrine was based on precision strikes and calculated aggression. But humans, he was learning, had evolved as persistence hunters. They didn't need to win every battle, they just needed to keep going, keep adapting, keep surviving until their opponent made a mistake. And the Nexari had just made their first major mistake. They had assumed that a species' technological level indicated their capacity for resistance. They had dismissed human imagination as irrelevant fantasy, not recognizing that imagination was humanity's greatest weapon. As reports of mounting complications flooded in, Vorkath realized a terrible truth. The Nexari Empire had spent millennia perfecting the art of conquering civilizations, but humans had spent just as long thinking about how to resist conquest. Every book, every movie, every story about alien invasion had been a training simulation, preparing them for this moment. The Admiral looked down at Earth, its seemingly primitive surface now revealing itself as a carefully prepared battlefield. This wouldn't be a standard conquest. This would be something the Nexari Empire had never faced before, a war against an enemy who had been waiting for them all along. Send word to the Imperial Command, Vorkath ordered, his voice heavy. Earth classification upgraded to non-standard engagement. Request immediate tactical reassessment. But as he gave the order, he wondered if it was already too late. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were fighting back in ways that no military doctrine could have predicted. And this was only the beginning. 3 weeks into the invasion, First Observer Selvak sat in her analysis chamber aboard the Eternal Victory, surrounded by holographic displays of human behavior patterns. Her role was to understand conquered species, their breaking points, their psychological vulnerabilities, their paths to submission. But the data before her defied all established models. They're not breaking, she reported to Admiral Vorkath. They're transforming. The Admiral's scales rippled with irritation. Explain. Selvak gestured at the displays, bringing up footage from around the globe. In previous conquests, we observed consistent patterns. Initial resistance, followed by despair, then acceptance of inevitability. But humans. She paused, mandibles clicking in frustration. They're displaying what we'd previously classified as psychological breakdown, but they're functioning at peak efficiency within that state. The footage showed humans adapting to the invasion in ways that seemed to defy rational behavior. In New York, subway maintenance workers had converted their underground networks into a maze of traps and false passages, using their intimate knowledge of the tunnels to devastating effect against Nexari ground forces. In Mumbai, street vendors had turned their intimate understanding of crowd flow and urban movement patterns into an intelligence network that seemed to anticipate Nexari operations before they began. But it was the individual human responses that truly disturbed the Nexari analysts. Humans under extreme stress weren't becoming more cautious. They were becoming more aggressive, more innovative, more willing to take risks that any rational being would consider suicidal. Look at this, Selvak said, highlighting a particular incident. This human lost their entire family to our initial strikes. According to every psychological model we have, they should be incapacitated by grief. Instead, the footage showed a single human who had spent days methodically studying Nexari patrol patterns, identifying weaknesses in their armor, and then single-handedly disabled an entire squad using nothing but common industrial chemicals and timing devices. The human had survived, disappeared, and presumably was planning their next attack. They're all like this, she continued. The more we hurt them, the more dangerous they become. It's as if pain and loss aren't deterrents, they're catalysts. Vorkath watched the displays with growing unease. How do they maintain unit cohesion? Their command structure is in chaos, their military leadership scattered. That's just it, sir. They're not maintaining traditional unit cohesion. They're forming something else. Selvak brought up new data streams. Humans have an extraordinary capacity for what they call informal organization. They create complex, functional networks out of chaos. A resistance cell in Berlin might share tactics with fighters in Buenos Aires through encrypted civilian communication networks. A breakthrough in defeating our sensor technology in Tokyo spreads globally within hours. The admiral's scales darkened. Surely they have a breaking point. Every species has one. Sir, Selvak's voice carried an unfamiliar emotion. Was it fear? We're dealing with a species that turned their own mortality into a source of strength. They know they're going to die eventually, and instead of being paralyzed by this knowledge, they embrace it. They create art about it. They joke about it. She brought up more footage, humans laughing in bomb shelters, singing songs during battlefield lulls, creating dark humor memes about the invasion that spread across their information networks. They process terror by mocking it. They face inevitability by defying it. Our psychological warfare tactics aren't just failing, they're backfiring. A new alert flashed across the displays. Another Nexary ground force had gone dark, this time in the mountains of Afghanistan. The humans there had drawn upon centuries of experience fighting technologically superior forces, passing down knowledge through generations. They hadn't just prepared for this fight, they had been practicing for it through every previous conflict. There's something else, Selvak added, her voice dropping. We've detected a pattern in human historical records. When faced with extinction-level threats, they don't just resist, they change. They undergo radical cultural and technological evolution at rates that should be impossible. They're not just fighting us, sir. They're using this conflict to transform themselves. Vorkath stared at the displays, watching as humans across the planet continued to defy every prediction, every model, every assumption about how a species should behave under overwhelming force. The Nexary had evolved as solitary predators, coming together in rigid hierarchies for efficiency. But humans had evolved to band together, to become stronger through adversity, to turn shared suffering into unshakable bonds. Update invasion protocols, he ordered. Classification, extreme hazard. Humans are not to be engaged individually. They are most dangerous when isolated and presumed defeated. But as he gave the order, a new understanding dawned. The Nexary Empire had spent generations perfecting the art of breaking a species' will to fight. But how do you break the will of a species that transforms defeat into defiance, that turns grief into strength, that responds to the threat of extinction by becoming something new? The answer was becoming increasingly clear: you don't. You run. Chief Engineer Caxtel stood before the Nexary High Command's holographic projection, his scales pale with distress as he delivered his report. Our technological superiority is becoming a liability, he stated, words that would have been unthinkable mere months ago. The assembled commanders shifted uncomfortably as Caxtel brought up the first example. This was a standard class for battle drone, equipped with adaptive shielding and neural network targeting. The image showed the drone's wreckage. It was disabled by a combination of commercial fertilizer and diesel fuel, detonated by a device made from a cellular phone. One of the commanders interrupted. Surely our shields were calibrated to defend against plasma weapons, particle beams, and nuclear detonations, Caxtel finished. Not the crude chemical reactions humans favor. They're not trying to match our technology. They're going beneath it. The presentation continued, each example more disturbing than the last. Humans were turning their primitive technology and infrastructure against the invaders in ways that no advanced civilization had ever considered. In Australia, Aboriginal knowledge of the landscape had led Nexary ground forces into natural death traps. In Canada, logging equipment had been repurposed into primitive but effective anti-aircraft weapons, using chains and cables to snare low-flying craft. The humans have a saying, Caxtel continued. Knowledge is power. But they don't mean just advanced knowledge. They preserve and value all knowledge, even that which seems obsolete. And now they're using everything. He brought up footage from different theaters of war. In Vietnam, ancient tunnel networks were being combined with modern mining techniques to create underground systems that played havoc with Nexury sensors. In Switzerland, centuries-old alpine fortifications were being used alongside modern technology to create defensive positions that seemed impossible to crack. Their greatest advantage is their inefficiency, Caxtel explained, his voice carrying a note of reluctant admiration. We evolved towards perfect optimization, developing single solutions for each problem. Humans, they never stopped experimenting. They have dozens of ways to do everything, and they're combining them all. The footage showed more examples, ancient martial arts being adapted to exploit weak points in Nexury combat armor. Traditional fermentation techniques being used to create biological agents that fouled their advanced filters. Construction workers using their equipment in ways that turned urban environments into death traps for Nexury forces. But the most dangerous aspect, Caxtel continued, is their information sharing. He brought up intercepted communications. They're not just using their official military channels. They're using something called social media. Resistance fighters are sharing successful tactics through encrypted channels, creating instruction manuals, even posting tutorial videos. The commanders watched in horror as humans documented and shared their improvised warfare techniques with the same casual enthusiasm they once used to share recipes or home renovation tips. A teenager in Brazil would discover a weakness in Nexury armor, and within hours, resistance fighters in Ukraine would be exploiting it. Their creativity appears to be fractal, Caxtel explained. Each solution they discover leads to multiple new applications. When we adapt to counter one technique, they don't just find another, they find 10 more. He brought up a final set of statistics. Our supply lines are being disrupted by weapons made from farming equipment. Our communication networks are being compromised by repurposed civilian electronics. Our advanced AI systems are being confused by tactics borrowed from human children's games. The chief engineer's scales had taken on a grayish tint of deep concern. We designed our invasion protocols to counter threats from civilization Type 1 through Type 3. Humans are technically pre-Type 1, but they're fighting us with techniques from their entire history, from the Stone Age to the Digital Age, all at once. A commander spoke up. Surely we can adapt our defenses. That's just it, Caxtel interrupted. We're trying to adapt to everything simultaneously. Our shields are now so complex trying to stop every possible threat that they're becoming energy inefficient. Our AI is so overwhelmed trying to predict human behavior patterns that it's starting to break down. We're becoming less effective as we try to counter their chaos. He paused, mandibles clicking in what might have been nervous laughter. They have a term, MacGyver, named after a fictional character who could create solutions from random available materials. We thought their entertainment was just fantasy. We didn't realize it was training. The presentation ended with a simulation showing the accelerating rate of Nexury losses. Their superior technology, once their greatest advantage, had become a complex system with countless potential points of failure. Meanwhile, human resistance grew more effective each day, as they learned, adapted, and shared their deadly innovations. Final assessment, Caxtel concluded. We are not facing a pre-Type 1 civilization. We are facing every type of civilization simultaneously, using tools and techniques refined over thousands of years, delivered through modern communication networks, and implemented with what they call, desperate creativity. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Nexury had built their empire on the assumption that technological superiority guaranteed victory. But humans weren't trying to win by being superior. They were winning by being unpredictable, resourceful, and absolutely relentless in their improvisation. And they were just getting started. Cultural analyst Miravex stared at her data displays aboard the Eternal Victory, watching as another carefully planned Nexury operation fell apart. This time, it was happening in Singapore, where a coalition of street food vendors, construction workers, and financial analysts had somehow coordinated to disable a major Nexury supply depot. The diversity of skills and perspectives involved wasn't just impressive, it was completely alien to the Nexari mindset. "I believe I've identified their true weapon," she announced to the War Council. "It's not their technology, their resources, or even their improvisation. It's their diversity." Admiral Vorkath and the other leaders turned their attention to her presentation. The display showed thousands of human cultures, languages, and belief systems, all interconnected in complex ways. The Nexari Empire achieved dominance through uniformity and standardization, Miravex explained. But humans, they thrive on differences. Each human culture developed unique solutions to survival challenges. Instead of converging on optimal approaches, they maintain thousands of different methods, philosophies, and perspectives. She brought up footage from different resistance movements worldwide. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous tribes were teaching urban guerrilla fighters how to move invisibly through dense vegetation. In Japan, ancient ninja infiltration techniques were being combined with modern hacking methods to breach Nexari security systems. Every culture was contributing its unique knowledge and perspectives to the resistance. "Look at this pattern," she continued, highlighting communication networks. "When humans face a problem, they don't just seek the most efficient solution, they seek all possible solutions. Their different cultural backgrounds lead them to approach the same challenge in dozens of ways simultaneously." The Admiral's scales darkened. "Surely this makes them inefficient, prone to conflict." "That's just it, sir," Miravex interrupted. "They are prone to conflict. They argue constantly. But they've turned argument into a strength. When humans disagree, they don't just choose a winner, they often create hybrid solutions that are stronger than either original approach." She brought up more examples. A Buddhist monastery in Thailand had become a fusion of meditation center and tactical planning facility, combining ancient mindfulness techniques with modern strategic analysis. In Mexico, traditional Day of the Dead celebrations had been adapted into a sophisticated system for maintaining morale and honoring fallen resistance fighters. "They have another saying," Miravex continued. "Think outside the box." Their cultural diversity means they don't just think outside one box, they think outside thousands of different boxes, all at once. And they're sharing these perspectives faster than we can adapt to them. The display showed the exponential growth of human resistance techniques. Each cultural group was contributing its unique insights, which were then being adapted and modified by others, creating an explosive growth of tactical and strategic innovations. Final analysis, Miravex concluded. "We assumed that a species with so many different cultures, beliefs, and approaches would be easy to divide and conquer. Instead, their diversity has become an unbreakable defense. They're not just resisting us, they're combining their differences into something entirely new." She brought up a final image, a global map showing the intricate network of human cooperation across cultural, national, and ideological boundaries. "We're not losing to human technology, or human tactics, or even human determination. We're losing to human diversity itself. Every attempt we make to understand and counter their resistance only reveals new layers of complexity we hadn't considered." The War Council sat in stunned silence. The Nexari had spent millennia perfecting a single way of conquest. Humans had spent millennia developing countless ways of everything. In trying to defeat humanity, the Nexari had awakened something unprecedented, a species that could turn its greatest apparent weakness, its bewildering diversity, into its greatest strength. And as the resistance continued to evolve and adapt, one thing became clear: the Nexari Empire had never faced an enemy quite like humanity, because humanity wasn't just one enemy. It was all of human history, all of human culture, all of human perspective and potential, united against a common threat while maintaining the very differences that made it unconquerable. Supreme Commander Zyxvar, leader of the Nexari Empire's military forces, arrived on the Eternal Victory 6 months into what should have been a routine conquest. Instead, he found an empire facing its first true defeat in 10,000 years. "Show me everything," he commanded, his scales shifting through patterns that hadn't been seen since the Empire's founding days. patterns of genuine concern. Admiral Vorkath, First Observer Selvak, Chief Engineer Caxtel, and Cultural Analyst Miravex presented their findings in the ship's main strategic chamber. The holographic displays told a story that defied all Nexari military doctrine. Humans, Vorkath began, have turned unpredictability into a strategic asset. The displays showed the pattern, or rather, the deliberate lack of pattern, in human resistance. When the Nexari developed countermeasures for improvised explosive devices, humans switched to biological agents. When those were defended against, they shifted to psychological warfare. When that was countered, they invented entirely new forms of combat. They're not just being random, Selvak explained. They're deliberately cultivating chaos as a weapon. Our tactical AI has become practically useless because humans are intentionally acting against their own statistical patterns. The footage showed resistance fighters drawing tactics from sources no military AI could have predicted: professional sports strategies, stage magic principles, prehistoric hunting techniques, and contemporary flash mob organizations. They weren't just thinking outside the box, they were denying the existence of the box entirely. Their information networks have evolved beyond our ability to track, Caxtel added. They're using everything from quantum-encrypted digital communications to ancient smoke signals, often simultaneously. We can't predict their movements because they're using methods from every era of their history, modified and combined in ways that even they didn't expect. Miravex brought up new cultural analysis data. They've developed what they're calling adaptive swarm tactics. Different resistance groups worldwide are operating independently but with shared objectives, like a human superorganism that can lose any number of individual cells without compromising the whole. Supreme Commander HFY watched as the displays showed the latest statistics. Nexari forces were operating at 40% efficiency and declining. Supply lines were compromised. Morale was crumbling. The Empire's greatest strength, its predictable, efficient, standardized approach to warfare, had become its greatest vulnerability. But the most disturbing development, Vorkath continued, is that they're learning. Not just about us, but about themselves. This conflict has taught them things about their own capabilities that they never knew. They're not just defeating us, they're transcending their own limitations. The evidence was undeniable. Humans had taken their greatest weaknesses, their division, their chaos, their stubborn individuality, and turned them into insurmountable strengths. They'd transformed their lack of standardization into an advantage that no uniform force could counter. They have a concept, Miravex added, called emergence. Complex systems arising from simple interactions. What we're witnessing isn't just resistance, it's the emergence of something unprecedented. A species that can turn its own internal conflicts and contradictions into assets. HFY's scales shifted to the deep purple of fundamental realization. We've made a mistake more profound than any in our history, he announced. We've been treating Earth as a planet to be conquered. But Earth isn't just a planet, it's an incubator. An evolutionary crucible that created something we never could have predicted. The final displays showed the current state of the invasion. Nexari forces were trapped in a war they couldn't understand, against an enemy that became stronger with every attempt to weaken it. The Empire's perfectly optimized military machine was being defeated by humanity's glorious imperfection. Send the order, HFY commanded, his scales now showing the pattern that no living Nexari had ever displayed: unconditional surrender. All forces are to withdraw immediately. Earth is to be classified as beyond conquest. Additional classification: existential threat if provoked. As the Nexari fleet prepared for its historic retreat, the Supreme Commander added one final note to the Empire's records: we came to Earth expecting to find another civilization to absorb into our perfect order. Instead, we found humanity, a species that turned chaos into strength, diversity into power, and unpredictability into victory. They didn't just defeat us, they showed us the fundamental flaw in our Empire's philosophy. Perfect order, we now know, is perfectly vulnerable. True strength lies in adaptation, in diversity, in the beautiful chaos of possibility. The eternal victory's engines hummed to life, preparing to leave Earth's orbit. Behind it, humanity had been changed by the conflict, but not in the way the Nexari had intended. Humans hadn't become more ordered, more standardized, or more predictable. Instead, they'd become more connected while maintaining their differences, more cooperative while preserving their individuality, more powerful while retaining their beautiful chaos. As the Nexari fleet disappeared into deep space, Earth's defenders shared a collective moment of victory. But it wasn't just a victory over an alien empire, it was a victory for the human spirit itself. They had proved that their greatest perceived weaknesses, their disorder, their diversity, their stubborn refusal to conform, were actually their greatest strengths. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the Nexari Empire began its own transformation, haunted by the realization that their perfect order had been shattered by the magnificent chaos of humanity.